Okay, so we're going to start, and we're going to start with some administrivia. So this is how I'll start each of the lectures, even the recorded ones and the live ones. Anything that I think that you need to know just in terms of how to be successful. I've had one student reach out to me and say that they have already registered with SAS as a note taker for the course. If you are interested in being a note taker for the course, then our student accessibility services would really appreciate people volunteering to do that. And they have a link on their site that you can in fact do that. And you take notes for your colleagues and your peers in the course, and then they share it with those that are in need of that. Tutorials do start on Monday. We have 2 that start on Monday. So you will in fact be getting links from your TAs either today or over the weekend, with a link to a Microsoft Teams site that they will be running the tutorials. And as I said, that they are highly recommended. We can't make them mandatory, but they are highly recommended. And we do, in fact, see a strong correlation between those that go to tutorials and success in the program, especially this year, because we're using tutorials to build academic studying and writing skills for you as well. Make sure you look at your syllabus for due dates that are coming up. Our first big one, obviously, is the op-ed, but there's a communications capsule that will be due within a couple weeks as well. As I indicated already, all the lectures will be recorded, and they are, after a little bit of post-production, posted on our A2L website. And as we've said already, Top Hat starts on Tuesday. Okay. So just in terms of membership, and this, for those that have already subscribed to both Top Hat and Critic, congratulations. There is a good 50 to 70 students that are not registered in these platforms. We will be doing them. They will be part of your assessment. So I would suggest that you become familiar with it as well. And just as a note, both of these sites have tremendous video tutorials to help you become familiar with what you need to do as well. How do you access Top Hat? How will it be used for both the participation, attendance, and engagement? And then specifically with Critic, how do you in fact create the content, evaluate the content, and give feedback to everyone? So beware of those 2 things as well. Let me give you a sense of a note-taking. We are generally been driven to start taking notes or transcribing lectures. The good news with these today is that we have them recording, we have closed captions, so we can in fact follow those along the way. But generally speaking, from an academic perspective, I'm not a big fan of students transcribing lectures. Not that I have anything against it, you can do that, but what cognitively transcribing lectures doesn't actually help you process the information. And what our research shows is that those students that actually handwrite their notes and summarize or in fact synthesize the lecture material do 10 to 12% better on exams and written materials than those that just transcribe. Because what happens cognitively is that you're not actually processing the information. You're hearing the information, you're transcribing, and then by the time the lecture is over, you actually have to go back and reread the lecture notes because you didn't actually process that information. So just a suggestion as you work through your university studies, how to become a better handwritten note taker to help you do better in school as well. Okay, we're going to start off every class with what I call this what's in the news, because this course is all about the media, the communications industry, information industry, those things that tie us together through video, audio, text as well. And I want you to start paying attention to what is happening in these mediated environments. And when I say news, I'm not just talking about regular mainstream media. I'm talking about things that are happening, that points of views are being assessed. This could be on Reddit, it could be on other platforms as well. But when organizations and people start to in fact coalesce around concepts or ideas, that's what I'm doing. Obviously, for many of you, I guess you might not even have been born when this happened, but I was in Syracuse, New York, doing work, getting ready for a public meeting on the night of September 11th when life changed. So this is how New York celebrates the anniversary, the 19th anniversary today of the attacks on New York City and Washington, D.C. So that's a big international, mostly U.S. driven as well. What else is in the news? Well, We Charity decided that they can no longer support a Canadian operation. So many of you may have, in fact, experienced We through We Days in your high school and grade school as well. And obviously, this is something that has been captivating Canadian political news for some time because of their involvement with a summer student job program as well. It has impacted politics in Canada. The finance minister resigned as a result of this, and the prime minister's family has been tied to this as well. So where it started, the Kielbergs are from Canada, and now will focus their operations in the United States and Europe. This is devastating entertainment news. I know all of you are really upset by this. Wow, you know, the Kardashians have decided after 21 years that they're just not going to do Keeping Up with the Kardashians. I can tell you, I've never seen one episode, but it might be something that is really upset a lot of people. Inspiring news for those who are sports fans. I'm not a big basketball fan. I'm probably a bandwagon kind of fan, but the Raptors continue to hang on. And so, you know, entertainment, sports almost fill up most of our surveillance of information, as does hard news. Here's some devastating news as well in Hamilton. And this is from CBC's online Hamilton site. Hamilton doesn't have a radio station. They just have a CBC platform. But body of a 27-year-old woman who's gone missing since January was found yesterday in a Hamilton harbor as well. And so, you know, news has a global impact, but we feel it on a day-to-day basis. You know, so those are devastating stories. Obviously, COVID and school and back to school and busing, especially for people that are outside areas where mass transportation can pick them up as well, are something that is happening as well. And here's some very disturbing news. I found it disturbing. This was an article that was printed in the Guardian, a UK newspaper, written completely by a robot, not a human, a robot. And they say it right off the bat. I'm not human. I'm a robot, a thinking robot. I use only 12% of my cognitive capacity. I'm a micro robot in that respect. I know that my brain is not a feeling brain, but is capable of making rational, logical decisions. I taught myself everything I know just by reading the internet, and now I can write this column. My brain is boiling with ideas. What's the implication of AI in constructing our news, right? The stories I've already showed you have a human element to it. Somebody is sitting at a desk at a computer screen writing those kinds of stories. But maybe we don't need those anymore. Many media outlets, especially online media outlets, are using artificial intelligence to, in fact, write what I would call commodity stories. Things like sports scores, right? Basic information that doesn't need a lot of opinion or emotional or insights to really be able to. They're really, in fact, gathering information, putting them together. So obviously, it has an impact on how information will be sent to us, and is already being sent to us as well. We have chatbots. When you contact a critic or Top Hat, you're dealing with a chatbot. You're dealing with people that are, in fact, automating the ongoing conversation, information sharing, communications exchange that you would normally have. I can guarantee you that we do not have chatbots. Jill is not a chatbot. So we're all human, and we're bringing you this in real time. So I want you to start to begin to pay attention. What are some of the things that are happening that you see and that you are engaged with, that you believe are relevant to this course from a media information action perspective as well? Okay, quiz time. So let's start the polling. So this is what we'll do every Friday as well. We're using Top Hat. It's a little bit different than how we will do it. But I'm going to ask you some questions based on the readings of the first chapter, just to see how you're doing with respect to understanding what what the chapter is all about. So every Friday from now on in Top Hat, we're going to do it and it'll track it as well. Unfortunately, we can't track this as well. So let's launch the first question of the first poll. Okay, there's 5 questions here. The communication model, who says what to whom in what channel with what effect, was formulated by Shannon and Weaver, Harold Laswell, Innes, Marshall McLuhan. Can you see that? Can everybody see that? Or you're just thinking? Okay. The social model of communication sees communications as. So there's 5 questions that I want you to answer. Okay. Take a couple seconds to do that. People are scrolling through, trying to figure out what to do. And Ria says, I don't have the textbook yet. Yeah, don't worry about it. This is a practice round for us. It won't. But it might give you a sense of how important the textbook is. So you can get the virtual textbook. I sent you the link to that as well. Okay, 20 more seconds. We'll shut it off at 3 minutes. 61% of people have made their selections and voted. Okay, poll is ended. So question 1, the communication model, who says what to whom in what channel with what effect, was formulated by Harold Laswell. So that was mentioned as they were talking with the Shannon Weaver mathematical model as well. But Laswell was in fact the communication theorist in the 40s that was trying to understand how the social human interpersonal connection really plays in understanding and studying communication as well. The social model of communications, which in fact was developed by the textbook authors as well. The answer there is A. So 47% did get that right, contingent on some shared element or space, right? So that notion of a shared experiences that the social model has that the mathematical model does not have. Speaking of the mathematical model, the main weakness of the Shannon and Weaver's model is that it is too simplistic. 51% got that right. Yeah, and that's a fair criticism, but the criticism I think of any model could be that the models are too simplistic, right? It doesn't take into all content. Think of when the Shannon-Weaver model was developed 50 years ago. They were trying to map out what are all the elements that impact the ability of an organization or a person to get their message understood. Number 4, do it this way. So number 4 is, in fact, in communication study, convergence can be understood as B. 47% got that right. Right. So half of you got it right, half of you didn't get it right. More than half of you didn't. So the mergence. So convergence is a term that communication scholars now utilize when we're talking about all these different kind of unique standalone platforms before, right? Print, audio, broadcast, digital, how they're all now coming together through one converged channel to deliver the same information as more. So you don't have to go to these separates. The CBC now, I showed you, is converging their news gathering and putting it onto the web and getting bounce back to both as well. So they're recording their nightly newscasts or their daily newscasts. They're also putting it onto the web, and so they're utilizing both channels to get the same information out to the public. And finally, according to the text, which organization is the largest signal advertiser in Canada? And the government, 63% is right. The government, which means all governments. And I would say today, the governments are the largest advertiser, especially as it relates to COVID-19 information as well. So the government is spending a great deal of money to get information, public health information out to the public as a way to protect all of us against for the spread of COVID-19. Through that policy or that simple act of spending advertising with media outlets across the country, the government are also supporting Canadian journalism, right? They're supporting the private and public sector through their advertising dollars. In many respects, the government funds the public broadcaster, but 70% of broadcasting in Canada is done through private dollars. So the government is supporting private enterprise. And that becomes a political economy questions. Should in fact governments be spending money, taxpayers' dollars, to prop up private industry? Private enterprise would say, well, they're spending millions of dollars supporting the CBC or TV Ontario, so why not? So well done. So we'll do that on an ongoing basis on Fridays as well, okay? So media, if you've really understood the core aspect of what is happening in this first chapter, the authors really suggest that media are, in fact, at the central point of our lives. We use mediated forms to understand what is happening around the world. I remember 19 years ago, 4 hours away from Syracuse, or from New York City, living in Syracuse, it became very real for us, right? I didn't have to actually take in much media to understand, because I had neighbors who had parents who lived in New York City. But at the same time, I had friends that lived on the West Coast of the United States, and they didn't have that same kind of close connection. So their only connection to those events was through the media as well. The story I showed you about this 27-year-old woman who was missing since January. Many of us won't know her, won't know her family, but we make that connection through what we read and see in the media. But the media is not a rational, logical channel of information by itself. The media shape what we see, what we feel, what we expose ourselves to, and how we view the world, because we can't be there firsthand, obviously is shaped by these gatekeepers, right? These mediators, people that bring us the information, and whether that is in mass media or social media, or as the book calls it, new media, digital media. Our perspectives are shaped by Facebook, by Google, by Twitter, by Instagram, by TikTok, because we see things through this as well. Media are also important about helping us make decisions. Right? And we go to these sites to understand more about what is happening. Right? You go to a doctor gives you a diagnosis of something. So you go to the media, go to the Mayo Clinic in the United States, or you go to, Government of Canada, Public Health. What decisions should I take? What kind of mask should I be wearing? Are the masks that I get at my corner store as safe as the mask that somebody can make for me as well? So we're using media to really help us guide how we live and how we operate as well. And it does carry us over space and time, right? And so I'll show you a couple examples of what I mean for that. But no, the distances aren't as huge anymore. They're not as significant anymore. When I was a kid, on significant events, Christmas or Easter, my parents would phone my uncles and aunts who lived in Ireland. It was a big deal. Right? It took me a long time to understand how this cable under the ocean could connect to these people thousands and thousands of kilometers away. And there was always a time lag in terms of the communications. But now I can go on Facebook, I can go on Zoom, I can go on FaceTime, and I'm speaking in real time to my cousins who are thousands and thousands of miles away. We are doing it here in this class with students that are studying here in India or China. And so we bring that, it constricts that space and time for us as well. It is, in fact, it affects us on all levels, right? On an individual, right, a micro level, media help us make better decisions, but it also helps us on a global level. And you just look at what's happening in the state of politics across the world today and how the media is reporting and the different ways that media are reporting these important events as well. The book talks about the notion that the internet has obviously been an important development for that shrinking of time and space by bringing more information, by making us better, theoretically, informed people. But the internet is just the channel, right? Just like radio was just the channel in the early 20th century. Just like newspapers were the channel in the late 19th century, the internet really has become that highway for us to be able to get this information. And as the book shows, and recent information support, Canadians are amongst the highest users of the internet in the world. We also pay amongst the highest monthly fees to be able to do that. So Canada, because of our distances, really have utilized it as a way of staying connected with the rest of the world. In the late 19th century, the transportation industry, right, the railway really was that ribbon of connectivity across the country. And we'll talk about this next week as well through a historical perspective, but the ribbons of steel, as MacDonald identified in the mid and late 19th century, was the way to make Canada this community of like-minded people, right? How do we bridge this together? We can do it through transportation, and transportation then gave us telephone, it gave us radio, and it gave us a way to connect Canada from coast to coast to coast. But there are concerns, and amongst the biggest concerns that we will obviously talk about and be aware of are the notions of privacy and privatization. Who owns these? Who gets access to it? The cost of accessibility to the kinds of technologies that we need to be able to go to school, right? So in our case, it's perfect, right? It allows us to stay safe. We can be at home. We can access this content. It's easier to access the content. We have transcripts. We have live closed captions as we give this lecture. But what are we giving up? And I've had some students that say, cost of getting onto this is difficult. How about time zone? Right? It's 10 o'clock here in Hamilton, but it's 10 p.m. in China. So these are things that we have to think about with media, right? The commercialization, the ownership, the power, the data. What are they doing? Companies like Google right now are not information providers. They're really data providers, right? They are becoming B2B. They're selling your data, your information, your access patterns to others who will want to sell to us as well. And privacy is critical for us, right? And I make this as a general statement about all of us in the world. We're generally lazy people, right? And so if you're going to give me something for free, I'm going to give you something back in return. The quid pro quo is that I'm giving you all my access to my data and my internet activity, and I get some kind of form of entertainment or information or news in exchange. That's a huge trade-off, and ones that we don't always think about. Just go and think about all these new agreements that we have to, in fact, agree to before we get use of it. How many have actually read through all of these different kinds of issues? Somebody talked about, just asked that question, I just saw it right now. What is the digital divide? The digital divide is the same as the haves and the have-nots, right? I have the ability, because I have a good job, and to be able to afford high-end 5 internet speed. I also live in an area where that is in fact accessible to me. What about those parts of the country or the world that don't have that level of affordability or accessibility? We see that digital divide in Canada, the difference between urban and rural, right? I get high speed at 100 megabytes per second here in my neighborhood, but somebody in rural Canada might not have that. And so it lags in terms of the delivery of it, or they're not able to do as much as they can as well. So that's what the digital divide really means. So the book also talks about what this notion, the difference between what is becoming digitized or specialized or micro level communication versus mass communications, right? Mass communication is when media outlets or information entertainment utilize their power and influence and technology to communicate to a larger group of people of issues that impact larger audiences, right? Larger audiences, those people that are interested in that. Right now, if we look at the COVID-19, the governments are using mass forms of communications to be able to send public health messaging out across Canada, throughout the world, to a large audience. If we bring it down closer, what happens when, we saw last week, there was a graduate student that had tested positive at McMaster University for COVID. So we didn't have to communicate that to the world, although by doing so, by just telling everybody we do that, but it's more focused on a different audience, the McMaster audience in that respect, okay? So we have to be concerned, because sometimes when we read these kinds of books, some people think that the mass audience or the mob or the great unwashed are less knowledgeable people, right? That they're easily to be manipulated. But if communication theorists have over the last 70 years have debunked that notion as well, right? If we just tell the audience one thing, they'll all believe. Well, we can see that playing on a daily basis. If you watch any kind of American political news, that is not the case. For some audiences, what a president might say resonates with them. For others, it doesn't. So we are now, through technology, really into a more sophisticated period of time that really helps us understand what are the best ways to channel our information to get to those groups of people that we need to talk to as well. For advertisers, mass is better because it means it's cheaper, right? I want a mass audience because I don't have to spend the money to go get these different kinds of audiences. What technology has done, what digital has done, is allow those mass audiences, because we have given away all this information and tracking, to be more specific and to begin to segment and micro-target audiences with messages that are in fact resonating with them specifically. And that, again, if you go back and look at British or American politics, some of the issues that of concern are influence of outside agents targeting specific groups in specific areas of a country with specific messages that resonate with them as well. So yes, we have a mass of people, but I would not say that we have one mass public. We might have different masses based on size, but also based on needs and desires? What are they looking for information about as well? So the book really talks about this notion that, you know, mass communication is actually transmission and transformation of information on a large scale. So think of the government of Canada or the province of Ontario or any of the governments where you are, and how do they get important information to groups of people that need it at that period of time as well. And the book talks about this notion that it is, in fact, for both information and entertainment, right? Streaming services, right? More and more people are using streaming services because we don't want to go out to movie theaters, and it's easier, and the selection is a lot better, one would suggest, and production and creation has now become decentralized, right? So we don't need these big movie companies making movies. People can do that and share it at a higher, more efficient rate as well. And this dimension of it is that, in fact, we have some level of exchange. Yeah, I mean, I guess we could say with 208 people on this Zoom call right now, in some respects, it's mass communications. But we've also allowed that sense of interactivity, right? We're finding ways to give you a channel to ask questions amongst either myself or Jill as well. How are we getting this information, right? We're mostly getting it on mobile devices, right? And as this from Statista really has shown us, just from 2014 to 2020, if you look at it, we nearly had a doubling of smartphone users across the world as well. So that's 2.87 billion smartphones that are in circulation up until 2020. So that was done last year. We've probably already seen we're across the threshold of 3 billion devices as well. When you think of that, 7 billion people in the world, nearly half the population in the world have access to smartphone technology. And that changes how people, in fact, get their information, right? It's more micro-targeted. The Internet of Things is, in fact, this notion of connectivity. So not only are we getting information through our smartphone, but we are now connecting all these devices through the Internet to make our lives more efficient, better, right? Ask your parents if they're shopping for appliances when they go and look at a $4,000 LG refrigerator that not only plays videos, but in fact can tell you what supplies you're down on. So it can send you messages to your smartphone to say, hey, I know you're at the grocery store, so why don't you pick up some extra milk because you're low on milk? Or somebody's at your front door, you're not at home, but because you have Google Nest, they can, in fact, you can connect with them as well. So this is the Internet of Things. When all things are connected and the devices speak to one another, think of the issues that we have with that, right? The privacy. What if people get a hold of that kind of information? What will it mean to us as well? How do Canadians spend their time on the internet? Well, we spend a lot of time on the internet, right? Whereas, as the book says, we're amongst the highest users on digital platforms. And you know, this is data collected in 2019, but I'm sure it's even higher as we speak because of because of the situation that we're in, right? 50% in 2019, 50% of people shopped online. I would suggest that's probably about closer to 75% because we're not going to the grocery stores. We're, you know, Amazon, grocery, you know, Costco, all these places are delivering right to your home as well. So we are hooked on it. We spend at least 3 to 4 hours a day. Well, you're spending way more time on this than 3 to 4 hours a day just by learning because of this notion, because of the situation that we're in as well. 73% of Canadians say, yeah, they're concerned about it, but you know what? They do nothing, right? 43% said they changed their privacy settings. How many of you have changed your privacy settings in terms of Facebook? What information? 32%, 1/3 of us have said that, no, we've taken too much action. We have taken no action. It's too much. I don't know how to do that. You know, what are they going to do? My whole life, everybody knows my whole life. And 1/3 of the population have said that they've sort of checked out in some way, right? They've gotten off of Facebook or they've gotten off of social, and see how long that lasts for most of them, right? So, but 73% are concerned about privacy violations, data hacks, people who have gotten, who've hacked into other websites or other companies and have used your financial information potentially. But we're not less than half the population are actually doing something about it. So the book talks about this notion of time and space. And authors like Harold Innis and Marshall McLuhan have also really focused on this as well. Now, time-based communications, space-based communications as well. We are, when I think of it, my dad emigrated to Canada in 1925. It took him 2 weeks on a boat to get there, right? I can drive to the airport, get on the plane, and be in his hometown in less than 12 hours. And so technology has reduced it, but now I can be there instantaneously and through technology. So we are, in fact, technology has allowed us to broaden our perspectives of the world, but also be a closer, more closely knit world in terms of the information that we need to know. Just again, this will give you an example, right? I've reduced time and space by the internet because it allowed me to track down my family. I spent some time a number of years ago doing a family tree. Well, I was able to, in fact, find documentation. This person, John Flynn, is my great-great-grandfather. Right? I would have had to go to Ireland, go and access the records and find that information. But yet here I was sitting in my home kitchen on my laptop, being able to pull that information together. Right. So that's, again, what media and communications are doing, is making us more informed, finding out what our family lineage is, finding all the secrets as well, maybe not wanting to know some of them. I also have done work in Brazil, looking at a Canadian company in Brazil, and I went to the archives in Ottawa, and I was able to pull together some of theirs. And in the early 20th century, the two ways of communicating was by telegraph or letter. The document on the left, the telegraph, was instantaneous. They used code words to be able to, in fact, ensure that encrypted. That would their early 20th century forms of encryption. And you will see underneath is, in fact, a translation from what that was. And on the right-hand side is, in fact, a letter. Now, I was curious to know how long it took a letter to go from Sao Paulo or Rio back to their head office in Toronto. And it took about 2 weeks. Right? So 100 years ago, how instant communications, was not something that was new or available to everybody as well. Okay, so times have changed in just that short 100-year period. Okay, so the two models that the book talks about, really this finding a way of how do we make that connection? How do we ensure that there is something from a sender to a receiver and that some form of communication happens? I go back and talk about what we said in our first lecture with George Bernard Shaw, right? The illusion that communication has taken place, or my words that, just because we communicate, just because we talk doesn't mean that we in fact communicate, that there has to be a process of understanding that happens along the way as well. Okay, so how do we make sense of messaging? What does that mean to us? What do we do about that? And then what social impacts or variables can we begin to look at that impact forms of communications as well? So this is the early messaging system, is that you would have a sender, me, I have a message, I have a lecture, and I want to send it to you, students, right? Well, traditionally, we would do that in a lecture hall, right? Pretty easy. But I still have to kind of get it to you. I have to develop the message, right? I have to decide what I want to, in fact, say. Maybe I do PowerPoints. Maybe I write down some notes. Maybe we're speaking the same language. Hopefully we're speaking the same language. If we're not speaking the same language, we have to find some different way of, in fact, encoding it. We do it in a lecture hall. Now we're doing it on the internet. So that's the channel of delivery of that message. And then you have to, in fact, interpret it, right? You have to decode it. You have to look at those words. What does that word mean to me, right? Oh, I wasn't paying attention, so I have to go back and reread it. Or I'm looking at this closed captions as well. That's helping me decode in some of the respects. And then it becomes resonant in you, right? Sender to receiver, but that's way too simple, right? Just because I send it to you, how do I know, in fact, you understood it? How do I know, in fact, you received it? Maybe you got bumped off the internet. Maybe you were, if you were in our lecture hall, maybe you were paying attention to your phone and you weren't really paying attention to the lecture. So you didn't receive it, you didn't hear it. You have to find ways to get in notes. You're asking questions, seeking clarification. So what's missing in this original kind of linear process is any kind of feedback, right? Feedback, maybe that's why we use testing. That's why we're going to use Top Hat to make sure that people are there, that they're doing it. But this notion of noise, cognitive noise, is something that in the early models, they really didn't take hold of. And so that's what it started to begin. And what is cognitive noise? Well, cognitive noise is anything that limits our ability to process a message. It could be attention, right? We have a shortened attention span. It could be other things that are competing for our information or our cognitive processing. Today, obviously, social media overload might do that as well. Or other things, maybe you had an argument with your parents before class, or maybe you couldn't get on in time and you're trying to catch up. So these things are, in fact, limiting our ability to really understand. So we have more channels to communicate, but in fact, are we processing information as efficiently as these channels would allow us to do as well? Communications really is about how do we make sense? It's in symbols, it's words. When I say the word Canada and I ask people what their perceptions are, people from around the world have different perceptions of Canada, right? That Canada's safe, it's clean. Canada in comparison to something else, right? In the early days, we had funny colored money, now plastic money, maple syrup. So there's different ways that communications through symbols and texts and allow us, in fact, to position or help people make sense of things that we are doing, okay? And as I said, it can be a mass, but it also can be very individual. It can be from one person to another person, right? The book talks about, in this first chapter, the two-step flow model, right? So if I am that one person, maybe I'm sharing information that I know with a group of different people who will then go on and share information to other people as well, okay? Two-step mass media or opinion leaders. So I get my information, I share it with them, the opinion leaders pick it up, and then they share it with their, so in that picture I was using, that opinion leader might be that person sitting at the front of the room who's sharing that with different groups of people, right? And so this two-step flow is that we might not get all our information from the mass media or information sources, but we might get it through trusted sources. We might get it through people who we trust. And those are the mass groups as well. Communications has shown that, in fact, healthy, proactive communications saves lives, right? Good communications between doctors and patients saves lives. By the way, that was my mom. She was a pretty funny, sarcastic woman. It helps identify us, right? When we send out messages like this, we talk about who we are, right? We share with that. We give people a sense of who we are. Communications, pictures that we post on media tell people where we are or what things that we are interested in, shows the kind of escapism that we might be involved in. It's practical. Communication is important because it helps us, especially now. Think about hand washing. What song do we sing when we want to wash our hands long enough? Happy birthday, 20 seconds. You see on floors, if you were on campus right now, social distancing signs are all over the world, are all over the campus as well. So it's critically important when we need to get information out that effective communications allows people to make those right decisions as well. Okay, so the Shannon Weaver's model, taken from that early one that I talked about as well. Right? We have a source, so we have a message, we have a channel. Second message is in fact the received message, decoded, and it goes into the receiver. But that first model didn't have this feedback loop, right? We want to check in to ensure that the sender, then the message received was the same message that the sender sent. And the semantic or cognitive noises that we deal with could in fact be other things that are taking our attention away or misinterpretations. There could be some basic, what we call fidelity issues. Maybe this video is lagging, right? So that would cause a disruption in the channel in terms of its fidelity or clarity in getting you that message as well. But as critics would say, this is way too simple, way too easy, right? And that it's way more complex than just understanding that there's noise and there's message and there's decoding, because how the source encodes the message into symbols and either interprets or decodes those symbols are really dependent on many social factors that both the sender and the receiver may understand, may be aware of, or may not be aware of at all. So it doesn't talk about this, and it doesn't talk about individual traits as well. So this is the social model that the authors of the text really propose. And if you wanted to be critical about this could be seen on its face to be very simplistic as well. But it spends more time understanding what's the context of the communications, right? What's the purpose of the person communicating? What's their ideology? What's their perspective? What's their intention, right? What forms of communications are they using? Is it persuasive? Is it trying to help us learn more? Is it for our understanding as well? So we really want to study the context in which communication is sent to. For communication scholars like myself, what's happening in COVID really is an important context to understand things, right? Every research that we do today has to be framed or shaped by our understanding of the world in these very difficult times as well. Why did they select that? Why did I show a picture of my mother? Why have I showed pictures of family, right? So we have to understand, we have to make some sense of interpretation as well. Why are we choosing Zoom versus other forms? Why not call somebody instead of sending an email? So those mediums that we purposely select, we have to really interrogate the choice that we make as well. And then how do we begin to decode? What's limiting them? What's their understanding? What's their perspective? Are they in agreement ideologically or culturally? Are there a sense of alignment as well? Or is there in fact a misalignment between ideology and the message to in fact be impacted? And then the decoding the content to what degree does it shape the content, the encoding context and content of before? So it's simple, it looks simple, but it's certainly not simple from a scholarship, a studying perspective, why we study this as well. It's very complex in terms of how we understand these messages as well. So what are the variables? Look back, look through it, interrogate why that choice, what's influencing them, what makes them critical as well. So again, the book talks about these notions, right? What I would suggest is that we talked about this as well. The difference between mass and micro really has become amplified because of technology as we go through it. I've actually showed this. I've got a double here on this one. Okay. So what's new media? The book just again talks to you about this notion that digital becomes new media. So it's had different kinds of names as well. So new media is just new to us today. It might be old media in 10 years as well. So the medium, the book makes that distinction. Digital, new media is just the form of how we get that information to people. Okay. So with a minute left, here's what you need to do for next week. And when I say read chapter 2, I mean all pages in that chapter. So I had a question earlier this week that said, do you mean all of chapter 1? Yes. So chapter 2, pages 29 to 57. Remember that your tutorials start next week. I will post by Tuesday morning at 9:30 a recorded lecture. And the recorded lecture will be like this, but it will be through Top Hat, and there will be questions assigned. So I will assign it to you as homework. You have to watch the video, and I will assign some questions for you to answer during that as well. If you have SAS, student accommodation services issues, please make sure that you email me to discuss it, and start to think about op-eds, think about things that are happening in this world. Okay, have a great weekend, everybody. I look forward to seeing you next week. If you have any questions, make sure that you understand that your first line of communication is always through your TA. And if you can't get a hold of your TA, send a note to Jill, and then we'll be able to satisfy these issues for you. Okay, have a good weekend, all the best.